Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language. Katie and Arlene hanging out here again. Katie, what is new on the farm? I saw you sent a picture. There has been white stuff on the ground at your place. Is winter getting closer?
When I went to Cambridge last week, it was still kind of like mid-fall. You know, like the leaves had turned, they had fallen, but you could go out in like jeans and a t-shirt and it was pleasant. And when I came back, it was fucking November. It just got peak November-y all at once. And yes, it had already been November for like 2 weeks when I left. But
It hasn't really felt like November. I think we have gotten similar. I mean, as far apart as we live, I think we've gotten a similar with November because November was surprisingly warm this year until this week. Yeah. So it was like November didn't really hit in its full Novemberiness until we were well into it.
November can just be so November-y.
It's really not the nice month.
But we're traveling for American Thanksgiving next week, which the kids are very excited about.
Where are you traveling? How far do you get to enjoy your family?
Pennsylvania. 16 hours of enjoyment.
That's a big drive.
We break it up into 2 chunks and try to run off as much energy as we can in between. So we've done it before. It's not that bad. It's just getting in the car. You know, once you're in the car, it's fine because it's, you get to that point where it's kind of too late now because you're halfway.
Right. You've gone far enough. You might as well keep going.
We replaced a battery that wasn't holding a charge on a fencer, so now the cows are staying in. So that's nice.
Oh, that's helpful.
Some of our calves are getting real furry, and it takes more juice in the wintertime to contain them than it does in the summer when they're not.
And they've gotten bigger too.
Yeah. It takes more when they've got, 4 inches of hair on them than it does in the summer. Other than that, same old. Do the things. Except that my kids have somehow, just this month, both grown astronomically. All of their clothing has disintegrated. My daughters...
I feel like we've had this conversation before, not that long ago. Why did they keep growing?
I think maybe because I keep feeding them. Maybe I'll stop. See if that helps. My daughter's shoes just disintegrated yesterday, which they're not even 2 months old. So that's kind of a feeling. And it's coming on Christmas. So we're doing that whole Christmas thing.
It is weird that Christmas is the holiday that takes up so much of our energy. We're recording on this on the 22nd of November, so it's still a month away. A month before Thanksgiving, I'm not thinking about Thanksgiving. Or a month before Easter, I'm not really thinking about Easter. But when it's Christmas, somehow we need to think about it and celebrate it and decorate for it and prepare for it for so many more weeks.
Well, and you're supposed to celebrate it for at least a month ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. I already went to see the Christmas Carol. I mean, it's November. Why did I need to go see a Christmas play? But that's when it was being performed, so that's when we went.
If anything, we should celebrate Thanksgiving for a month ahead.
I mean, you could celebrate from the time of Canadian Thanksgiving right through until American Thanksgiving. We could just have that be the holiday. And there's no gift giving, so that's why I like Thanksgiving better. So much less planning.
Although I will say it'll be a little late when this comes out, but I feel like it's probably a pretty flexible holiday. Tomorrow, the 23rd of November, is Wolfenoot, which is the day that we celebrate dogs and their general awesomeness. It is a real holiday. And I'm very excited about it because I can get my dogs 1 bone each and maybe a tennis ball, and they'll be super stoked about it. And the girl child and I were talking about buying some extra treats and taking them to the animal shelter for the dogs that are no longer with us, in honor of them. And I just feel like we should have more holidays that are about awesome stuff like dogs and less holidays that are about theoretically something religious that now even non-religious people are expected to celebrate with tremendous, massive consumerism, guilt, and overwhelm and overspending, which does not mean that I am not fully prepared to be overwhelmed and broke.
Yeah. I'm buying in, but
Maybe we could work on.
why did it turn into this?
So there's that.
There's that.
How's life in your world, Arlene?
Well, what has been happening the last week? So a friend and I started going to a personal trainer, which I think is a good decision for a variety of reasons. So she and I are both dairy farmers and both in our 40s. And we have decided that our goal is to get stronger and prevent injuries. So he's working with us both in terms of flexibility and building strength so that hopefully we can continue to do our physical jobs for longer. So that has actually been really enjoyable. Now, the first week after our first session, not so enjoyable because I was so sore and we were just sending messages back and forth being like, what hurts today? But since then it hasn't been quite as bad because I had kind of fallen off on the weightlifting side of things, and I feel like that in my 40s that's solidly not meant to be, that wasn't intended, but that feels like where I need to be focusing my efforts. So that has been good. And having someone else motivate me to get there, both the trainer and knowing that a friend is meeting me there is really good for actually getting me out the door and going to those sessions. And it also comes with a gym membership. So my now 14-year-old has started high school, and in gym class they get to use the weight room some of the time, and so he has started to kind of get into that side of things too. So we actually did our first mother-son workout session the other day at the gym, which was actually really cool. I didn't know that I was going to be weightlifting with my teenage boy, but it was fun, and I was the one showing him how to use some of the equipment, so that was also cool. And another interaction I thought was really neat. It's a small town gym, so, it's not very busy. There was an older guy there, and he saw us working out together, and we were on different machines at one point. And he came over to me and asked me first if it was okay for him to go over and give my son some pointers. And I just really appreciated him not being the gym dude who just like walked up to a young guy and was like, here's what you need to do. But he checked in with me first because he knew we were there together. And I said yes. And then I heard him go over to my son and say, is it okay if I give you some advice? And he said yes. So I just loved the fact that he was respectful, but also wanted to share his experience. So I thought that was really cool because that doesn't always happen.
I know this might sound ridiculous, but seriously, Arlene, if you see this guy again, please thank him for me. Because it's so easy for us to start worrying that any amount of helping other people with things we know about comes across as obnoxious mansplaining. It's so easy for people to be obnoxious mansplainers. And no, you don't have to be a man to mansplain things. We do need a different word for it. But it's great to see people respectfully offering help to people and sharing something that they presumably enjoy.
Yeah, that's right. And, hopefully it meant that he was doing something that would be more effective and potentially safer, or just, using the equipment properly. I'm not exactly sure what all he shared with him, but I thought that was a really positive interaction. So that was a good place to start for our first session together. And we've already got our second one on the calendar. So that'll be extra motivation for me to get to the gym because now I've got 2 people expecting me to go there. So, well, 3, I guess, including my trainer. So
4 if you include the gym guy.
just look out. I'm going to be so buff.
You'll be in great form for broom hockey.
Ball hockey, yes.
Ball hockey, yes.
Yeah. Broom ball is a sport too. I don't play that. That scares me. Running on ice seems sketchy. See, people seem to enjoy it, but I don't know that that's something I'm going to take on in my 40s.
Yeah. I feel like every broom ball game I've observed has ended with blood. And in your 20s and not sober, that's a lot more palatable than it might be in your 40s.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest for this week?
All right. Sounds good.
Today, we are happy to be talking to Michelle Schack, who is joining us from Arizona. So we get to cross another state off of our list. So that's exciting for us. Not just that we get to talk to you, but also that we get to add another state to our list. So Michelle, we always start each of our interviews with the exact same question. So this is your intro to our listeners. We always ask, what are you growing? So for our farmers, that's usually crops and livestock, but also is kids and businesses and all kinds of other stuff. So Michelle, what are you growing?
Well, I'll start with kids. I am growing 2 kids. I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they are a lot of fun. They are growing fast every day, it seems like. In my business, I hope to be growing some confidence in farmers on how to talk to consumers and how to reach out to the public and share what they're doing. And I hope to be growing some confidence in consumers about making more informed food choices through my efforts online.
So can you give people some more context to what expertise you are bringing to your online platform and sharing with people?
I can. I am a dairy veterinarian. I've been a veterinarian for 9 years, and I have clients. I'm in private practice. I own my own business where there's a partnership. There's 6 of us, and we work throughout Arizona and some neighboring states. And that is first and foremost what I do. I identify myself as a dairy veterinarian, and I just love that job. Since I have been doing that, I've also expanded out to do other things. So I co-founded a dairy education company, which trains dairy farmers and employees on animal care, animal health practices, and animal well-being. And I love doing that. That's a big part. It's an online platform, and we're developing that more and more every day. And that's a lot of fun for me. I also then, since starting that, started on the socials because I was very proud of what we were doing on farm and then with the education piece, and finding that a lot of people don't fully understand all the work that goes into dairy farming and all of the efforts and care that the farmers put into caring for their livestock. So I started online, and I'm on TikTok is where I started. And then I'm now also on Instagram and Facebook. And I share out, I'm the Dairy Doc online. I share out just things that I see in my daily life and how the farmers are caring for the animals and common things that happens on farms. And I do some public speaking around that as well.
So I know that dairy farms especially look a lot different in different places. So for someone who's living in a cold climate in Canada, I know that my dairy farm is probably going to look a heck of a lot different than the ones that you're working on in Arizona and surrounding areas. Can you kind of describe the types of farms and the scale and, kind of setup of some of the farms that you're working on?
Sure. In Arizona, the average herd size is around 2,500 milking cows. So we have pretty large scale farms out here, and most of them are freestall or dry lot farms. It's very dry here, just year round, very dry. And so we do really well having the cows out on dry lots. There, when it rains, it very quickly dries off and the sun comes out, and we're able to scrape those pens and clean them out and add fresh bedding and keep them fluffy and dry and comfortable for the cows. Now, that type of system would not do well where you are. It's just so wet, they'd never dry out. But you, a lot of times in the year, have really lush pasture, which is just such a nice luxury. And in our area, I have one farm that tries to keep their cows on pasture, and it's really challenging. Just the water usage and trying to get the right grasses to grow, and then moving the herd so that the pastures have rest time. I mean, it's just really challenging in this area because it's just so arid. So that's one thing that I try to really highlight online, is that farms look different in different places, and the right way to farm is really doing what's best for your environment. And it's very regional. And then also there's some preference that comes into it too. And that doesn't mean the cows are any less or better cared for. I mean, truly, if we tried to keep your system where we are, it would not go well for the cows. And if we tried to put my system where you are, it would not go well for the cows. And so we need to do what's right for the cows and not what we think looks nice. I've been to farms all over the country, and I think it's really cool. That's an awesome part of my job, is that I get to see a lot of different farming styles and practices. And like last year, I was on the East Coast. I was out in Maryland area, and they kept apologizing to me that it was so dry. And they said, "Oh, this time of year, it's normally so much nicer than this." And I said, it was September. I said, "I haven't seen this much green in years." I mean, it was just looked so amazing to me. But for them, that was really dry. And so it's just different in different places. And I think that that's important for people to see that aren't on farms, and even the farmers as well. I hear that a little bit too. Sometimes some judgmental comments being thrown around that one way is better than the other, but really it depends on the environment. And as long as you're doing what's right for the cows in your environment, with your facilities, with your setup, that's what's important.
That's a really good point. And I mean, there are experts who are out there doing research, veterinarians and animal researchers who are doing experiments and doing work in finding, the right technology for us, the right housing styles, ventilation, all those types of things that work best in those different climates. So, we have to trust, our animals and our experts and ourselves to provide those, quote unquote, the right conditions for them. And they're going to let us know too, right? If they're happy and healthy and milking well, then that's a sign that we're doing a good job. And if they aren't, then that's that's when we need to start, consulting with those experts and figuring out where we need to go.
Definitely.
I know, Michelle, it makes me really sad when we hear farmers tearing each other down about production practices. My husband and I were talking last night, actually, about a well-known shepherd who is really pretty rabid about people ever lotting sheep. And this person is lucky enough to live in Eastern Oregon, where they have beautiful pastures 364 days a year, I think. We live in Northeast Iowa. I can leave the gate open, but when that snow gets up above my sheep's backs, they're not going out. They don't care. They don't want to be out there. It is cruel to put them out there. But I've had some conversations with this person where, despite being a well-informed producer with a beautiful flock, we've had some real go-rounds about the fact that, my sheep, they still go outside. They go out on their lot, once a day when they get fed, and then they come right back in the barn because it's cold as shit out there and it's snowing, and sheep won't walk in snow. They just won't do it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, in that it also depends on how you're doing it. So perhaps that farmer has only seen sheep be lotted in really poor environments. If you're saying, well, I bring all my sheep up into this tiny pen that now is overcrowded and so muddy, and there's feces everywhere, and they can't, they have no room to move. Okay, yeah, then you shouldn't be doing that. That's right. But if you have the right setup, you have the right facilities, and you've put the time in and the effort and the money to make sure that your animals are cared for, then they can do just as well indoors as outdoors. And that is better in your system. So just because the idea doesn't sound nice to someone, and this goes for the public or other farmers or what have you, it doesn't mean that that's how it is in every system. So I think you have a really good point. And I think that the farmers need to recognize, and everyone needs to recognize, that we should be looking at the individual farms. There's not just this is bad and this is good. There's right and wrong ways to do everything. And so what we need to be ensuring is that people are doing the right thing for the system that they have set up.
So, Michelle, since you didn't come from an ag background, how did you end up as a dairy vet? Did you marry a dairy vet? Because I feel like usually when we hear non-ag people say they ended up in dairy, it's because they married a dairy farmer. But marrying a dairy vet seems weirdly specific.
No, I grew up in California, in Silicon Valley, and it was very very much a city environment and a large suburban environment. There really wasn't any ag where I grew up, but I knew I wanted to be a vet. So I went to UC Davis for my undergrad, and UC Davis has a very good vet school. And so I knew that that would provide me some opportunities to get involved in veterinary medicine during undergrad. But when I was there, they sucked me into the ag world. As an animal science major, you take your animal science 1, right? And as a part of that class, we got to go to all the different barns. So Davis has a sheep barn, they have a pig barn, they have a goat barn, they have a beef barn, they have a feedlot, they have a dairy barn, they have all the species. Excuse me. And that provided me with a lot of opportunities to get exposed to a lot of different agriculture. And I loved it. And so that was really a blessing to me, because when I shadowed a small animal vet, I realized that I didn't like it at all. So I actually explored a lot of different things. I worked with sea lions. I worked at a zoo for a summer. I worked with all sorts of different species, because I thought, well, if I like cows, then what else do I like? But I just kept coming back to the cows. Those were my favorite. In undergrad, what really was really solidified for me was that I wanted to go into production animal medicine. I really enjoyed food animal medicine and having that greater purpose of providing food safety, food security for the world. That just was really interesting to me, and I loved that part of it. I actually got to live at the UC Davis swine facility, so I lived at the pig barn. My roommates were pigs. I was the herd manager, and I just lived in a little room in the barn. And that was a really cool opportunity for me, because I got really heavily involved, and I was able to start to take on a leadership role, make decisions. And it was just really awesome time. Although everything smelled, my laundry smelled,
I was gonna say, how do you go out at night and not smell like a pig? But I guess you did.
I did. I just smelled like pigs. It's just, it like gets in your nose hairs and you can't unsmell it. It's just there forever. So I lived 2 years at the pig barn, but that was really great. And Davis had a lot of cool opportunities. Like my first role at the dairy on campus they called it a heat detection intern, which means I sat for an hour every evening and watched the cows and observed which ones were in heat and wrote them down. What's funny is I look back now, and they tail chalked those cows. They didn't need me to write down which ones were which, but they made up this role. But it was great for me, right? I mean, I really got to see the cow's behavior. I got to understand the the whole estrus cycle and how they would act in different times. And then I got to follow up in the morning on which ones actually were in heat. Was I right? And watch them and how even just feeding behavior, lying behavior, how they interacted with each other. Because I just sat on the fence for an hour, and that was such good experience. So Davis did a really good job with that. And then I went to vet school, and I chose dairy in my last year of vet school, and never looked back.
I think, too, that observation is so great, because there can be such a tendency among humans, just because of who we are, to value what technology tells us over what observation tells us. And, we've had animals where what the scientific data would have shown us would not have been an accurate portrait of what ended up happening. So I think it is really important to learn those skills and to learn to trust what you're seeing versus what the KMAR is telling you,
Yeah. And for me, not growing up in ag, that was just so invaluable. I mean, because a kid that grows up on a farm sees that every day, and just it becomes second nature to them. They don't have to think twice about it. But I didn't have that. And yet I still got to where I am today. I think people put a lot of pressure on farm kids that they have to come back to the farm, or we talk about that we need the dairy farms are going out of business, and it's just so sad that the kids don't want to return to the farm. But it's not on them. Everyone should do what they want to do. The problem is there's just a huge barrier of entry for people that didn't grow up in ag. But we don't look at other professions and think, gosh, why didn't their kids do that? My dad was the HR director. Nobody's running around saying, well, how come the HR director kids didn't go and become HR directors? Nobody's saying that. And yet somehow we put a lot of pressure on ag kids. And sure, it's great if they come back to the farm because they do have so much knowledge and experience. And that's wonderful. But if they don't want to come back to the farm, then they shouldn't be feeling guilty about that. And we should be welcoming new people to come into agriculture, because that's how we're going to make our whole industry more sustainable. It's not all on these few farm families that are out there. We should be welcoming new people coming in.
Absolutely. And there are places in the world where there are different models that aren't just pass it on to your kids, right? I mean, if you look at dairy farms in New Zealand, for example, there's a lot of places where, a farm might be owned by someone and then managed by someone else. And those people are paid to run the farm. And it doesn't have to be someone's kids. It could be someone who has applied for that role and is passionate about it and has the skills, whether or not they grew up on a farm or not, or maybe they worked on a farm and transitioned into that kind of a role. But this pipeline of one farm to the next generation is difficult for lots of reasons, and also unrealistic in a lot of ways. I mean, we know that there are farms that have transitioned between multiple generations, but there are lots of farms that get sold, and that doesn't have to be a failure. Like you said, it doesn't mean that someone has done something wrong. It's just that someone had a different passion, or they kept the farm and turned it into something completely different. It's not a dairy farm anymore. Now it's a Airbnb or hotel, or they've got pigs instead of cows. There's lots of different ways to use properties, and it doesn't have to be a failure. You're right, if the kids don't take it over.
So, Michelle, I had another question too. As someone who's in tech and at my company of 3,000 odd people has finally found someone whose parents are actively farming, that's as close as I've gotten to finding any other farmers. When you go home to Silicon Valley for a high school reunion or something, what kind of reaction do you get when you tell people that you went into dairy vet?
Oh my gosh. Well, when I first started getting involved in this, my family thought I was nuts. They're like, you're doing what? Honestly, when I was a kid, I don't even think I even thought that cows had veterinarians. Like, it never even crossed my mind, And so usually people are really supportive and excited when I go back and talk about it. They have a million questions, everyone, it's the same questions that I get on social media, but they also want to know, they have the James Harriet or Dr. Pohl idea of the veterinarian. So they want to know how many calvings do you do? No, they don't say it like that. They say, do you help a cow give birth? And yes, I do. And that's fun for them to hear about. They want to hear stories about how the cows are treated. They want to understand how the cows are cared for. It's a little bit less about my job as a veterinarian and a little bit more about the animal care. And I think that has given me really good insight just from how I used to think and what my family thinks and what my friends think. And I just, because I came from that background, it gives me a lot of knowledge and insight into how they're seeing the world and what is interesting to them. Because they ask a lot of questions. It's also fun to talk to them about, like, a lot of people think that it's amazing that we would do a C-section on a cow, for example. That's one that always gets people. They're like, oh, but you do? How do you do that? But you don't have a surgery suite. And what about anesthesia? And really, the farmer would pay for that? And, they just are genuinely interested in the lengths that we go to care for the animals. And that's been, like I said, a big driver for me of like, man, we need to get this story out there. These people they love it. They're so interested. And yet we don't have enough people talking about it.
Everyone has an origin story, but some stories hit you in the heart. And the story behind one of our past guests is totally one of those. It all started with a young kid named Kawani.
Yeah, Sean, the chicken guy short of Blooming Health Farms, didn't know he'd be a chicken farmer or that he'd be teaching you how to turn your flock into a business. It began with Kawani, a kid stuck in the court system who needed a second chance. He joined Sean at Blooming Health Farms to turn his life around.
One day, Sean showed Kawani how to sell fresh eggs at a local market. As Kawani started selling those eggs, Sean saw the real power in what he was doing. It wasn't just about the eggs. He was building skills and getting respect from the community. That one small act of selling eggs transformed his life.
And that's how Blooming Health Farms was born. Sean saw that selling eggs could be more than food. It could be a way to help others learn business skills and build their own futures. And now, through their online community called Pimp Your Flock, Blooming Health Farms is taking this mission even further.
Pimp Your Flock is a community for people who want to turn their passion for chickens into profits. You'll learn how to turn your flock into a real income source, and when you join, you're supporting Blooming Health Farms so they can help more kids like Kawani build a better future.
So if you're looking for a way to turn your flock into a business and be part of something bigger, join Pimp Your Flock at pimpyourflock.com. Not only will you learn the skills to make your egg business grow, but you'll also be part of a community that's changing lives.
Head over to pimpyourflock.com today and let's make an impact together, one egg at a time.
Well, I think I'm going to bump my next question up. Sorry, Arlene. I feel like so much of farm advocacy comes from people have really good intentions and they really want to know about how their food animals are treated, and they really, things come from a very good place, and some of the things that people believe because of what they've been told can seem really stupid to folks who deal with animals, day in and day out. But I think it's really crucial to look at how we set people straight without telling them that they're idiots for believing this thing about something they know nothing about. I mean, I know there's plenty of things that I have misunderstandings about. And I'm wondering especially about things like there's pus in your milk. And I mean, technically, there are white blood cells in your milk, but it's not pus the way people think of it. And I think those sort of things where it's technically half true can be so much harder to unwind from people than the things that are just like, if someone came up and said they set cows on fire every day, I feel like most consumers would be like, no, they don't. But I'm wondering how we as farmers can improve our communication with folks to hold our tongues a little bit about how do you believe such stupid shit, and like really kindly re-educate these people who really, they're not anti-farmer generally. They're really pro-farmer. They just aren't getting information from the best sources.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to two really important things you just said. First of all, that everyone has good intentions. We all are on the same team here, that we want the cows to be well cared for or the animals to be well cared for, right? That is something that we have in common. Farmers, veterinarians, the consumer, retailers, we all want the cows to be well cared for, and there is zero excuse for mistreating the animals. And so I think that's really important to remember, that we're kind of all on the same team when you back it up a lot. And this doesn't need to be a fight between each other. And then the other thing is that you said that there's things that you've had misunderstandings about too. Yeah, we forget that. We're so involved in the farming world that we're like, yeah, how could they think that? This is obvious. Obviously, we don't do that. Or obviously, that's not true. But it's not obvious to them. And if you ask me how my computer is working right now, you can bet I can't explain that. Katie can't even get her camera to work.
Yeah. I work in technology and I can't get my damn camera to work.
Yes. I mean, we can't be experts in everything. And there are people in this world that are very intelligent experts, and yet they've never given a thought to how a dairy cow is cared for or whether or not there's pus in the milk. And then I'll add that people are just really scared of the unknown. That's just generally true, right? And so if you've never given a thought to what's in milk, and then someone comes to you and tells you that there's pus in there and has the data to show that 750,000, the somatic cell count can be 750,000 legally, that's scary. That is scary. And we have to understand where people are coming from in order to have this conversation. I try to give a lot of comparisons to what people know. So, like you brought this up, the somatic cell count. If you look it up, human breast milk also has a very high somatic cell count. And it can be anywhere from 200,000 up to 1.5 million. And that's normal. And nobody's checking the somatic cell count of their human breast milk, right?
Oh my God, can you imagine? I'm sorry, but if a tester like came around in the morning while you were breastfeeding and like whipped out the little orange tubes and was like, God.
And yet that is a length that we go to on farm to make sure that the milk is safe for human consumption. And so I think if we can explain that to people and then tell a little story around it. You know, people also really react to stories. If you can emotionally connect with them on some level, then that makes a big difference. And that's really the heart of it, is understanding where they're coming from and speaking to them respectfully, and then trying to share a story and helping them understand where you're coming from. And then also recognizing that they may just have a different opinion than you. I mean, I will share stories and facts and figures all day long, but I'm never going to argue someone's ethics. If somebody just straight up says, I just won't buy milk from a farm that keeps their cows indoors, then the beautiful thing is that's why there's choices out there. We have food choices, and there's farmers that do lots of different things, and you can still support agriculture and support dairy and buy from a farm that doesn't keep their cows indoors if that's what you really believe. Now, I will educate you on how you can keep cows indoors properly, and that doesn't mean that they're not well cared for, but you can support any kind of farm you want. I mean, there's lots of different farming practices out there. And so it's good for people to understand that and understand that what they're supporting can be different. And that doesn't mean that it's bad or that someone else is bad.
I think it's fascinating because, I mean, I'm a farmer with children, and it had never occurred to me that there would be somatic cells in human breast milk. Because I do think people hear pus in milk, and you're thinking like abscess drainage, like, which I would never drink milk again if I thought that was true. Like, absolutely not. And things like, I totally respect people who don't eat meat. If they understand how meat is being produced and they don't want to eat it for themselves or their families, cool. Like, that's totally fine with me. If somebody's fed you full of shit and now you're terrified of it, that's a problem. And I have a problem with you being misinformed, not with you making this choice. And I think that's the part that we really have to dig down to, is that people should absolutely choose whatever is right for them, but they should have some actual facts about what they're choosing.
When it comes to people who comment on your content who are not there to engage with in conversation or learning anything and are just there, the activists are there just to say that you're wrong. What is your typical approach? Do you block people? Do you comment back? There's probably different levels of how aggressive people get, but what do you try to do with that type of interaction?
I rarely block people. Sometimes if it's getting very personal and it's making me uncomfortable, I'll block them, because you got to have boundaries. But if they're just saying, this is so terrible, like, for example, if they brought up, well, milk has pus cells in it, so how could you drink that? Well, then I will a lot of times respond to that and use that as a jumping off point for an educational video, but I won't really directly respond to them. I'll just say, let's talk about somatic cell count. And then I'll share about somatic cell count based on that comment. So that way, if somebody sees that comment, they can see my response to it. But I'm not really directly engaging in them. I'm just using it as an educational opportunity, because a lot of times those people, they will start the idea in someone else's mind. So even though I'm not going to change their mind, I can help whoever's reading their comment. And there's a lot of people that I'm not going to change their mind, but the other people that are reading their comments, I can potentially reach them. And I kind of love those controversial comments like that, because it just boosts my views. A lot of times, sometimes I'll just say nothing, and I have an army of people that will come out of the woodworks and start arguing with them for me. And so I just sort of monitor that conversation and jump in if I feel I need to. One thing I try really hard to do, though, is if somebody says something really generic, like they say, the dairy industry is cruel, I'll ask them a question back. What do you mean specifically? What exactly is cruel about it? What are you referring to when you say the dairy industry? Because people parrot these ideas and they don't always know what they mean. And sometimes a comment like that, the dairy industry is cruel, it sounds very accusatory, like maybe this is an activist. But sometimes when I start to engage in conversation with them and I just ask them questions and start to have a conversation, a lot of times they're not an activist. That's just what they've heard. And so they're sharing that. And when we start having a conversation about it, they're really open to learning. So I think we can be very quick to putting people in a box of they're against us, but a lot of them, they just don't know, or they've heard something different. And so if we can engage them in a polite, respectful conversation, that's something that I see a lot that I don't think is doing any good for the agriculture industry, is when farmers or people in ag respond and make fun of people for asking questions or for saying things, or even if they just, comment on your grammar. It's your with an apostrophe, not your. That's really stooping down to their level. And it's also not encouraging other people who are following your page to participate in the conversation. Because if somebody said something and then they got made fun of for it, now somebody else that might have the same thought or a similar thought or just a totally different thought, but they're now too scared to write it down because they don't want to get made fun of. And you may boost your views on those when you make fun of people that say stuff like that, but you're boosting your views within agriculture. The other ag people that are already on your side think that's funny, but the general public doesn't think that's funny. And so you're boxing yourself in. Now, if that's where you want to be, if you just want to have a following within the barnyard, that's fine. And that's good. I have no problem with that. But if you're trying to reach the general public, that's not how you're going to do it. We have to be respectful and engage with these people, because they want to ask questions. They have questions, and we want them to feel comfortable asking us, even if they ask it in a not very nice way. 9 times out of 10, if somebody asks me something in a not very nice way and I respond respectfully, they'll then rise up to my level and respond back to me respectfully, because they do want to learn. And so the more that we can do that, I think that's going to only further our reach.
I think that's a really good point, because like we said before, there's so many people out there with no connection to agriculture at all. So if they're the one of the first times they reach out and ask a question, a legitimate question, or make a comment on a farmer or an ag-based account is a negative one, then that is a really bad first impression or, second impression or whatever. But the types of interactions that we're having online are real interactions. Yes, it's behind a screen, but this is how people are communicating with each other. And when we're talking about people living in rural places where, people aren't going to come out to the farm necessarily, but if you're inviting someone to your platform and you are sharing your life with people, then yeah, you have to be willing to interact with them. And, doing so in a respectful way is the best way to reach people. And yeah, you might get more clicks from being snarky, but you're right. It's not going to set up a good interaction or going to expand your reach to people who are genuinely curious about what it is you're doing. Katie, do you want to ask your dairy and beef question?
I do. Um, Michelle, even as a beef farmer who has milked cows as a job, how do we get past the fact that some part of me looks at my fat little Normandy girls who are, if y'all aren't familiar, a Normandy cow looks like if you took an Angus and put another couple 100 pounds on her and then made her about 8 inches shorter. Uh, that's what they look like. Like, in normally, that is what they look like.
But kind of spotty like a Holstein.
Yeah. But like if you compressed a whole Holstein down to like half the height, um, but still the same amount of body mass. How do we get past the fact that Arlene's cows all look like they've been stretched out and never been fed, because that is just how Holsteins are built? And how do we educate consumers? Because if, as a farmer, part of it is like those poor, tall, skinny, super modelly looking cows who I know are extremely well cared for and in, the prime condition of their cow lives, and just the difference in the demands on a beef cow versus a dairy cow, and what a dairy cow at peak production looks like and requires, and just how different that is. Because I mean, Arlene and I are even in fairly similar climates, but if you took her cows and put them where we keep our cows, I mean, they probably wouldn't die, but they sure as shit would not be happy about it. And if you took my cows and put them in tie stalls, they would just die of horror from people looking at them. I mean, they would not be down for that. So I'm wondering how we can, I think this circles back to, assuming that people are doing what's best for what they do. But I'll admit that dairy cows make me a little uncomfortable, because they all kind of look like Kate Moss. I think maybe it's an age thing. They do look very, what was it, like cocaine chic supermodel-y to me, but with boobs, obviously.
They're very dainty. They're fine boned, and they have a different body type. And that's very true. So again, I try to compare it to something that people know, and maybe this will help you. We all look at a Chihuahua and we think it's so cute. We look at a Greyhound and we look at a Greyhound. What about Greyhounds? Do we think Greyhounds are cute?
The big ones, yes. The Italian ones,
Yeah, those little
I don't like little dogs, but okay, yeah.
Oh, come on, the little whippets and their cute outfits.
All right. So let's go with, what about like a sight hound? Have you seen a sight hound?
Yes. Fair. Coon dogs, anything like that. Yeah, they are that same.
Yes. And now imagine a bulldog or a pit bull. Those dogs are muscly because they're supposed to be muscly. And if an Italian Greyhound or a Whippet looked like a bulldog, we would have a real problem. That would be bad news for that dog, right? In terms of its health, because that's not what it's supposed to look like. That's not healthy for that animal. And in the same way, if the bulldog looked like a Whippet, that would be a real problem as well. There are different breeds, and we all know that there are different breeds and they look differently in dogs. What people forget is there's different breeds of cows also. And that breed doesn't just mean it's meant for something different. Or I sometimes also hear, well, the dairy cow has to put all her energy towards making milk, so she doesn't have any body fat. She actually does have quite a lot of body fat. She just carries it internally. It's not external. It's not built out on the muscles on the outside, because that's not what we've bred her for. And a beef cow has that muscling and that marbling because she's bred for beef. And so we've done this over centuries and centuries of breeding and care. So that's another thing I try to get across to people. And I actually have a post where I went back into old children's books, like, and stories. 101 Dalmatians, there's a cow in that movie, and like these old books from the 50s and the 40s, we can find these little storybooks, children's books that have pictures of cows, and the dairy cows, they all look like a dairy cow looks today. That's how they're supposed to look. Farmers aren't doing anything different or wrong now than they did in the olden days. That's just what the breed is supposed to look like. That's the look of a healthy animal. And usually, if you can put it in terms of something that people can relate to, that really helps them. And most people would agree that I usually use a greyhound and a bulldog because those are just really common ones that people know. But a better example is a sight hound, I think, because those are even bonier, but not everybody knows what those are. So a greyhound and a bulldog is usually what I use. And that, to me, is the best comparison to a dairy cow versus a beef cow. They are bred for different purposes and they have different body types. And healthy does not look the same on both of them.
Well, and I think, especially with the Olympics being this year, and looking at even the body types in Olympic track athletes, looking at the body type of a sprinter versus a shot putter, and what peak performance can look like for two different performance goals, and just, I'll try and desensitize myself to the hip bones on your cows, Harley. I'm not sure my cows have hip bones, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, your gymnast and your rugby player should not be built the same at the Olympic level anyway. They're not, neither of them would do well in each other's sport for sure. So you mentioned before about DairyKind, and I think it's easy for us to understand, advocating online because a lot of us have connected with that. But can you talk more about that work and DairyKind and who it's for and why you started it?
Sure. We founded DairyKind about 5 years ago. It's an animal well-being company and an animal education company. So our target is farmers and employees on farms. The farmers are very busy. They have a lot of requirements put on them by a lot of different people. And one of those is auditing or evaluation companies such as the farm program, FARM, is Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. And they'll come through and evaluate the farm. And a big part of evaluations, whether it be by the farm program or by retailers, which will also require evaluations, is training. That training needs to be documented and tracked. And so DairyKind really emphasizes a people-centered approach to animal well-being and focuses on the care of the cows and then also training the farmers and the employees that look after them. We have customers, we're all throughout the country. We're in 8 states across the country. And we have customers that are individual farms. We have co-ops, whole co-ops that have signed up for it. We have retailers that require their participant farms to use this program because it's a way to standardize that training and then provide accountability that they have been trained. All the farms want their animals to be cared for. But when you're hiring people, labor is a real issue on dairy farms. And when you're hiring people and then they leave so quickly and that turnover is really high, it's really challenging to efficiently train everyone. But it's so important to give everyone that base knowledge of their expectations of animal care. There's zero tolerance for animal abuse. All the animals should be cared for properly. This is what animal well-being means and why it's important to us. So those things really matter. And DairyKind is a way to deliver that message and connect the employees on the farm with the values of the owners and of the industry, really.
It makes a lot of sense. And, it's sometimes easier just to be like, do this thing and not that thing, but without the why behind it. And I know I'm one of those people who, if I don't really understand the why, I'll do it, but you might start to lapse a little bit, or you question why it's done that way, those types of things. But really having a better understanding of animal behavior and safety, I'm assuming that that's part of it too, right? Both for animals and employees, is so critical, because yeah, especially on dairy farms, it can get, just like, do this task and then the next time it comes around, I'll teach you the next thing, kind of thing, because yeah, with a lot of turnover especially, it's hard to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, and a lot of people come in, they say, yeah, I know how to milk cows. I've milked cows before. Great, get in the barn and milk cows. But we need to make sure that they understand the expectations on farms here and how the animals should be cared for, because perhaps you were taught the wrong way on a different farm. And so that's really important. And then back to your why, I am really passionate about empowering people to do a good job. I think that part of the reason we have high turnover is because it is easy to feel undervalued when you're doing this really challenging, labor intensive physical job for many hours a day in all weather. And this is your one job. And it's easy for the employees to forget that their job is really important. I mean, milking cows, that's one of the most important jobs on the whole farm, because you're not only caring for the health of the animal, you're caring for their comfort and well-being. You're also helping make sure that the milk is safe and it's clean. Those things matter. They're very important for the health of the animals, the health of and safety of the employees, of the people who are going to consume this product. I mean, that's a really important job. And the public as well. I mean, they talk about farmers, like you said, Katie, that farmers they are well respected as a profession. But then when we start talking about the employees on the farm, all of a sudden they don't seem to hold the same value in people's minds, but they should. This is really important work, and we need to be respectful and empowering of every job in the dairy, because it's a team effort. We all know it's a team effort, and we need to be being respectful and empowering of those people, that they're doing a good job and they should be doing a good job and they should be really proud of what they're doing.
I think, Michelle, that's a really interesting point too, because, as a beef farmer, my cows are pretty self-sufficient, where with dairy cattle, if you don't observe signs of mastitis or something when it first starts and it gets to be a problem, it can cost you a lot of money and really good cows and be a huge fucking problem real quick. And I can say, I mean, it's been more than a decade since I've milked full time. I still have nightmares about things going wrong while I was milking. I have dreamed about my current job, which is in tech and fairly high stress, once in the 5 years that I've worked there. I still have nightmares about milking. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's farm hired labor gets disrespected a lot, but we're expecting them to not only take care of our livelihood, but to take care of living creatures, and a shitload of money's worth of living creatures who will die if they're not taken care of. I mean, this isn't like, oh, they reshelved some books wrong at a bookstore, we can fix it tomorrow. Like, it is a very different set of stakes. Or even, put a hot tank into the truck and now we own all this milk that can't be sold. Yeah, it's, yeah, well, now we know why I'm still having nightmares about milking 10 years later. They've lightened up some, but yeah.
So I think we're going to transition from lots of dairy talk to the parenting side of the podcast. So we tend to always ask people about that transition point from not being a parent to being a parent, because it feels like that's obviously a huge life change, and no matter how many years it's been, it seems like everyone has a memory of that time and what it was like for them. So you said you have an 8-year-old. So 8 years ago, when Dr. Michelle went from being a dairy vet to a dairy vet and a mom, what was that transition like for you?
Oh my gosh, it was so challenging because I was pregnant my very first year in practice. So I was not only trying to,
Wow, look at you go.
oh my gosh, I was not only trying to just establish myself as a veterinarian, and everyone will tell you that that first year in practice is when you learn everything. School teaches you a lot, but it's that first year in practice that's where you really learn how to be a veterinarian. And so I was also pregnant. And then it was my first year in Arizona. We didn't know anyone. And then my son was born in July, and it was so hot. And I just remember being out there checking cows, and I was just so pregnant. And it was like I was carrying around a little heater.
And you're so hot when you're pregnant too. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, like I had this little heater that it just was I was carrying around, and it was already 120 degrees, and now I'm carrying around a heater, and it was really, really challenging. That was a hard time. And then my son was born, and we were so happy. I stayed home for a while. I stayed home. I didn't want to stay home very long. I stayed home a little longer than I thought I would. And that was challenging for me. That transition was hard because I wanted to be back at work. I love what I do. I did not like being at home. And that's an important thing to remember, is that there's different things that fill people's cups. And it was really good for me, I think, in the long run, because it really just solidified my passion for what I was doing, dairy medicine, and how fulfilling my career is, because I was ready to get back. Before I was physically ready, I was mentally ready. And so that was a little hard transition, but both my kids went to daycare at an early age so I could get back to work. And I just feel like I'm such a better mom when I'm working. I am able to just have my day, and I work hard, and I love my job. I love my clients. I love what I do. And then that brings me up so that I love coming home to my kids and my husband and having a good day with my family as well, because I had a good day at work, and it just all connects together. And I think people should be able to do what they want to do and what makes them happy. And for me, that's going to work and then coming home and enjoying my family.
Hmm. For a lot of people, I think, veterinary work, especially large animal veterinary work, is the unpredictable schedules, being on call, those types of things. Is that the reality of what you had to do in terms of, childcare and arranging family life, or were you able to, being in your practice, have a more quote unquote traditional day schedule, or how does that look for you and your family?
It's very unpredictable. Large animal medicine is definitely very unpredictable. And that's probably my biggest challenge as a parent, is that unpredictable schedule. I was very lucky that my husband had a 9 to 5 job and had a very predictable schedule when my kids were little. And that was really great. And then when my son went to kindergarten and my daughter was born, at that time, my husband changed careers and became a school teacher. So he now teaches middle school. So he has the same breaks and the same school schedule as the kids. And that was huge. Daycare, you can pay to have daycare all day long if you need it. And I mean, when my son was little, there were times that I would come home, I'd go in, nurse him at daycare, and then go back out. And then I'd come home and I'd pick him up and I'd bring him home for an hour, and then I'd get a call and I'd drop him back off at daycare and go back out. But I knew that my husband would be able to pick him up by the end of the day, right? And so I was very lucky with that. And now my husband is a teacher, and so has the same breaks. So summer break, fall break, winter break, he's home with the kids. And my schedule's kind of all over the place. Some days I'm home. Some days I go to work at 3 a.m. and I'm home by noon. And then some days I'm gone all day. Just last week, I was home. I got the kids in their pajamas and in their rooms, ready for bed, and they're reading, and I got a call. And so I had to go do a calving. So I said goodbye to them. I didn't put them to bed, but I said goodbye to them and I left. And then I did the calving, and then I had to be the calving was about an hour away. And then I had to be at a farm at 4:30 the next morning. And that was 3 hours away, and it didn't make sense for me to go home. So I just drove part way, and I slept for a couple hours at a rest stop, and then I drove the rest of the way, and I did my whole day's work at the next farm. And then I came home at the end of that day. But then it's hard because then you come home and yeah, you're home with your family, but you're also just so exhausted. I'm falling asleep on the floor while we're playing games. And so it can be really challenging. Those things are my biggest challenge, I would say, in terms of my job and as a parent. Navigating that balance is the unpredictability, for sure.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot of juggling. So having a husband with a predictable job seems like a key to success.
Huge. Yeah.
Do you have a piece of parenting advice that either someone has shared with you or you've learned along the way that you would want to share with other people?
My best parenting advice is also advice I use for myself, and also advice that I use in developing DairyKind and DairyDoc, the online brand, because I think we need to always remember where the other person is coming from when we're talking to them. I mean, when my kids ask me a question or they say something to me, I try to always put myself in their shoes and understand what their abilities and their limitations are, where they're coming from, and what they're actually asking. Sometimes the words they say are not what they're asking. So what is the intent behind this question or this demand? Or even when they get emotional, if my 4-year-old yells at me, go away, or she likes to yell, you're not going to get any of my birthday cake. And so that can feel triggering as a parent. It can be really frustrating when your kids are yelling at you that they hate you or you're not their best friend anymore. That's hard, right? But instead of getting frustrated, I try to always not take it personally, but take a step back and figure out what's going on with them that they're saying these things. Sometimes they're just overwhelmed with their feelings. Sometimes they don't understand what's going on and they're frustrated that they don't understand. We know that they don't actually think you're a bad mom. They just wish they could keep watching TV and you told them to turn the TV off, And we know they're not really mad that they got the blue cup and not the green cup. They're just really hangry right now. And I can relate to that, So I think it's the same with people online as well. With DairyDoc, I try to, if somebody says the dairy industry is cruel, or you should feed those cows, they're too skinny, instead of getting defensive, instead of taking it out on them and escalating the situation, it's better to step back and take a breath and then try to figure out what are they really asking. And that goes a long way in life and with kids and with the public.
Yeah, with our partners sometimes too.
Yeah. What's the intent behind these words? Because the words we say out loud are not always the words that we're meaning to say, or we have in our heads, or what's the point behind speaking right now. I mean, that's what we need to really get down to.
Yeah. Or for the people in our homes, they're not speaking to me right now. What could that mean?
Yeah.
So, Michelle, what's your favorite thing about raising your kids with a connection to ag?
I listen to your podcast a lot, and a lot of people have really good answers to this question. And I think mine's a little different just because my kids aren't being raised on an actual farm. We don't live on a farm. I got too much to do, and my life is too unpredictable to also try to care for animals. Although there are veterinarians that do it, and I applaud them.
You do not need a family milk cow.
No, I do not. So I think that I enjoy that my kids are not growing up on a farm, but are growing up with appreciation of what farming entails. I did not grow up on a farm, and I did not grow up with an appreciation of what farming entails because I had no connection to it whatsoever. But I think when we actually take a look at society, we are a lot more connected than people realize. We talk so much about, well, only 2% of farm family. What's the statistic? Only 2% of What's the statistic?
Yeah, production agriculture is, 2% of the population. And
2% of the population. Thank you. I'm going about it the wrong way. So,
and I'm never clear whether that's ownership, it includes farm workers, like what that stat actually means. But yeah.
right. But that's a statistic that gets thrown around, right? And so it makes us sound like, oh my gosh, there's hardly any of this, and we're this tiny club and nobody else understands us. But if we take a step back, there's a lot of people adjacent to agriculture, like me, veterinarians, there's consultants, there's the milk truck drivers, there's the people that work at the auction house, there's the USDA people, there is the lab technicians that are testing the samples. All of those people, they have an understanding of agriculture, and they know farmers, and they can help us get the word out about how cows are cared for, and they can share their knowledge as well. And so I hope that my kids are getting a unique perspective on their food, their environment, and farming, and then they're able to spread that message out to others, because they're going to reach a lot of people that maybe don't have any connection with agriculture. But if their buddy in school's mom is a veterinarian, then now they do, right? Those connections are there. We just have to find them. So I think that's a pretty cool thing for my kids. And then I'm a veterinarian. I am a public speaker. I am a social media person, content creator. I am a business owner. And I think it's important for kids to see that hard work and compassion modeled in their parents. So I love that I get to do that. When I went on that call last week, I didn't tell them, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I have to go to work," and that's it. I explained to them, there's a cow giving birth and she needs help, and that's mom's job. And I'm sorry I can't say goodnight to you, but this is really important, and I'm going to go save her life. And I did, right? And that's really cool that they have that appreciation that there's a lot of great jobs out there in the world, and they can grow up to be whatever they want to be. And what's important is that they're passionate and they work hard and they have compassion for others. Those values, I hope I'm able to instill in them.
I think that showing people all these ag adjacent jobs too is so important, to get folks like you into it. Because I had no idea how many ag adjacent jobs there were before I started farming, and I grew up in rural Iowa. Like, you just don't really think about it. But that whole, what you can't be, what you can't see, that if people don't even see that all these jobs exist, we're running so short on folks to fill these jobs, but we're not doing anything to let people know that they're even a thing that people do, and we really need to fix that if we're going to continue to eat. Because a lot gets made of, you can't eat without a farmer, but you can't eat without the milk truck driver either. So, it's all important. So we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And categories can be real or made up.
Well, I asked my kids this, so I'm going to give you my kids' answer. They told me that I would win the smelliest truck award.
Oh, wow. I feel like
you would have some stiff competition. I mean, you're not a hog farmer. This
might be the stinkiest truck they've ever smelled, but I mean, have they been to many pig farms?
Oh, no, that is definitely a unique smell for sure.
That's a good one.
I feel like I have to say that turkeys are the smelliest by far. Oh,
really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
How many people have had goats in their trucks, though? I mean, they're probably pretty smelly, too.
Don't judge me.
I'm not saying you specifically.
Bucks.
That's true. That buck rag.
Let's see if you put the buck in your truck. No, that's a next level.
Ooh.
That sounds like a kid's book. There's a buck in my truck.
The buck in the truck.
Yes, that's right. All right. We called it. Yeah, the three of us co-authors on that one. Before we start our cussing and discussing, here's a listener submission on the SpeakPipe. Don't forget to submit yours. What does our listener have to cuss and discuss today?
Hey, this is Laura from Northern New York, and today I want to discuss tattoos. Specifically, if it's okay to comment on other people's tattoos. because I distinctly recall listening to an episode of yours maybe a couple of years ago, and Katie saying something about it's not okay to comment on other people's bodies unless they're like on fire or they have toilet paper stuck to their shoe or something like that. But I don't know. I'm wondering if it's okay to comment on other people's tattoos if they're visible and if it's like a polite comment, like, oh, I really like that thing. Because I have tattoos and I don't mind when people comment on them, but I just don't know. So I want to know what your guys' take is.
All right, we'll go ahead and move into our cussing and discussing segment. So if you're a listener and want to submit yours, you can go to our SpeakPipe or our email. Check the show notes for the links for those. Katie, what are you cussing and or discussing this week?
This feels like a very particular and yet entirely universal experience, is when someone yells from the next room that they cannot find XYZ, or the remote's not working, or the TV's not working, or they can't find a thing in the fridge, or the fridge won't open, or, whatever. And there's that moment where you're like, do I stand up and go help them, or are they going to keep yelling? If I stand up, will I immediately hear, never mind, I got it? Like, there's just that momentary balance of like, how long do I wait to hear if they're going to get it themselves, or if they're just going to like completely lose their minds and this is going to ruin the rest of the day.
Yeah. I was listening back to an episode the other day, actually, and I think it was Katja from Australia who was talking about when someone calls her from like a farmyard and asking for help, and she's like, okay, but it'll take me at least 20 minutes to get there. Do you think you'll still need my help in 20 minutes? It feels like the smaller version of that. Okay, I can get up and move away from the project I'm working on, but will you still need my help when I get there?
It's the same feeling as like, will I have both boots on before you solve this problem, or will I only have one boot on?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yep. Michelle, what do you have to cuss and discuss this week?
I was recently tagged in this video on Instagram, so I'm going to share that. This person was arguing that because there is a lack of access to veterinary care in really rural areas, which is true, there is a perceived shortage of food animal veterinarians, which is debatable. And they said that the answer to this was to save spots in vet school for men. And I just about lost my mind because I am cussing and discussing the sexist comments that come out that are not only hurtful to women, but to men as well. Are we saying that women can't be food animal veterinarians, or are we saying that men can't get into vet school? I'm not sure, but either way you look at it, it's really quite terrible. And that is just reinforcing stereotypes, and it's hurtful to both parties. And I hear stuff like that all the time. Like when I had both my kids, I took off 10 weeks, and every time I talk to anyone, they would say, well, how much time are you taking off for maternity leave? And I would say, well, I'm taking off 10 weeks. And they would say, oh, I'm so sorry you only have 10 weeks. That's really terrible. Like, you really should have more. That's awful. And then they'd say, well, what about your husband? Is he going to be able to have time off? And I'd say, yes, he's able to get 2 weeks off, and he's going to take those 2 weeks off and stay home the first 2 weeks. And everyone's response, oh, that's amazing. You're so lucky that he's able to stay home and that he wants to come and help. And quite frankly, I wish that I could have had less than 10 weeks because I wanted to get back to work. And he wished he had more than 2 weeks because he liked to be home and help with the kids. And so we just, as society, when we say things like this, it's not just hurtful to women, it's hurtful to men too. These just are not good all around. And we have these built-in stereotypes, and it can be really frustrating to hear those.
Well, Michelle, your husband's just babysitting anyways.
Yeah, right. That's another one. That's a good example too. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I have to say, though, when you started to say that, saving spots in vet school, I did not expect you to say men.
No.
Like, that had... And I mean, maybe it's because we have a badass female large animal vet who comes to our farm, and I know a lot of badass female large animal vets. I know a lot of badass male vets who do both small animal and large animal. And honestly, anybody who wants to do rural vet work should be encouraged to do it because it's a hard goddamn job.
Yes.
Small animal or large animal.
I know, my mind was blown.
Yeah, and what we should really be talking about instead is how do we keep people in rural areas, or how do we encourage them to stay in rural areas, and what do we need to provide for that to happen? Are we like what we're talking about, if you're talking about men versus women, is probably talking about rural childcare. So let's talk about that as an issue rather than just picking someone who you don't think is going to want to take time off if they have kids, because I mean, men might want to take some time off too.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, hopefully, we're progressing into a world where men have equal rights to take off parental leave. I know I hate to throw the Canadian thing in again, but it's government mandated that men can take parental leave as well. And they can take, men and women, or if it's two men or two women, whoever, they can split that parental leave up between the two of them. And you don't have to be the person who has given birth to the child in order to take it. So if you adopt, or if you have someone as a surrogate give birth to your child for you, both people, or if it's only one person, whatever, like those weeks are available to the parents. It doesn't have to be one gender or the other. And that's, hopefully where parental leave is going in all places. So, I mean, it's not one or the other. And it's more about, do we have the services so that people can work and live in rural places? And that's not just about gender.
I will admit that being in a business where there are more men than women, and where everyone is given equal parental leave, 5 years in, it is still a little mind-blowing every time I have a male coworker take like 6 months of leave. And a lot of them, split it up or whatever, which is even better. But to see a man getting more than, when our daughter was born, my husband's boss called the next morning to ask when he was coming in, and we had a scheduled C-section. It was already in his work calendar, so to treat men like they are also people who are capable of doing their jobs, and like women can do jobs without presumably their boobs getting in the way of being able to C-section a cow or whatever. I don't know what they think the difference is going to be. Arlene, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
So the thing I was thinking about was when we were talking about other people having a connection to agriculture who didn't necessarily grow up in this industry. And we're recording this at the beginning of October. And just last week, we were at a show, another 4-H show, because that is my life through the summer and fall. But out of 15 kids, there were 5 of them who live on farms, and the other 10 don't. And all of those kids have calves that are borrowed and housed on other people's farms. But those kids have a connection now to animal agriculture. And that is so huge. And so, fully 2/3 or whatever the math is now, I'm questioning. Yeah. Like, so that many kids now have that connection to agriculture and are seeing the potential in an industry that they wouldn't have otherwise seen. So if you have animals, and probably most of you have animals and kids if you're listening to this podcast, not everybody, but I think it's really important to think about the ways that we are advocates for our industry, even just with our kids' friends and their families, and the ways that we're connecting with people in our community and showing them what agriculture can be. Because it's true, there might only be that stat of 2%. Feels like there's not many of us, but having those other people who you can answer their questions in person, because Michelle's doing a great job online, but the person that you see in the grocery store or at a parent council meeting or any of those places, you might be their farmer. So yeah, just be willing to answer questions anytime.
Arlene, I want to congratulate your club and your family too, for brainwashing that many non-farm kids, and also for the level of community support that takes, because it's not free for the people who are housing those calves.
We're still trying to figure out, like how horse farms do it, where they've got like people are like leasing horses and like also paying for rent and like mucking out. I mean, our kids work hard, don't get me wrong. They come and work at the barn and they muck out their show heifer stalls and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying they don't, but the payment schedule that horse farmers seem to have figured out is it's not quite the same in dairy and beef, I don't think. So we need to work on that model.
Yeah, maybe we need to do more. Well, I think part of the problem is that we eat cows. So I feel like some of that like horse girl attitude is lost when you're raising something that you may very well end up eating. But I feel like there's a strong marketing possibility here for making cattle girls and boys the same way we have horse girls. Like I feel like we've missed some real opportunities there.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's definitely if you follow the show pages online, there's definitely an aesthetic for each of the different breeds too. So we know that it's out there. So we want to thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us today, and just remind everybody where they can follow you online.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. It's always fun to chat with like-minded people. Anyone who is interested can follow me at DairyDoc on TikTok, at Dairy.doc on Instagram, or DairyDoc on Facebook. You can look up DairyKind at DairyKind.com online, or my website for speaking, michelleschack.com. And anybody, please feel free to reach out to me. I have a lot of students and a lot of vet students, undergrad, young people in agriculture that are interested in getting more involved or have questions about my story. So please feel free to reach out. I'm always open.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.